On June 19th, events on the Iranian front are rapidly escalating and moving in the opposite direction of what international media portrays. They're heading toward Iranian cohesion and a strategic shift in the medium term in Iran's favor. Yesterday, we had two major events that marked a turning point in the escalation. The first was the direct Iranian attack on the city of Beersheba, south of the occupied entity. According to Israeli media, the hit building was Soroka Hospital. But according to Iranian media, the strike was on a vital military building next to it, belonging to intelligence or an army command headquarters. As of this recording, we haven't been able to verify the identity of the building from an independent source. Regardless of its nature, you can see the building exploding in the video currently being shown. It's clear it was hit by one missile from a very small number of ballistic missiles Iran launched at Israel that day. The total didn't exceed about 10 missiles, but the explosion was massive according to the videos that spread. Dense smoke and rescue operations amid concrete and glass debris. At the same time, Israel began its field rationing plan as we predicted yesterday. According to the New York Times, this means rationing the consumption of interceptor missiles and prioritizing the protection of certain strategic and residential areas, leaving others exposed to conserve missiles due to inventory shortages. The second development was in the skies of Tehran. The CNN correspondent, who is himself in the Iranian capital and whose video is now being shown, confirmed that Iranian aerial videos are back online in Tehran, and that he personally saw aerial interceptions happening over the capital. This is a significant turning point because the return of the air defense system to operation in the heart of the capital means that Israel's ability to impose absolute air superiority in Iranian airspace has diminished. This will push Tel Aviv to revise its offensive plans in the coming days and will reduce the duration of its presence in Tehran's airspace, contrary to the first 5 days of the battle. On the other hand, Israel carried out a new strike targeting the Khandab heavy water nuclear facility, located in the Arak region, about 250 kilometers southwest of Tehran. This facility was a crucial part of Iran's plutonium production program, which provides an alternative path to nuclear bomb manufacturing other than uranium enrichment. The Israeli strike targeted the structural component that seals the reactor core in an attempt to completely disable it and prevent its future reoperation. These developments indicate that this war is heading towards escalation, complexity, and a longer duration than expected. Consequently, thousands of Israelis have become displaced. Their number, according to Hebrew media, has exceeded 5,000 people, in addition to tens of thousands of others looking for any way to leave the country, especially with the complete closure of airspace, paralysis of life, halt in production, and the beginning of goods shortages. People began fleeing by sea to Cyprus using private yachts and passenger ships despite the exorbitant prices and security risks. Others headed east through the Allenby Bridge or Wadi Araba crossings to Jordan, and from there to airports like Amman and Beirut, and then to Europe. In the south, some used the Taba crossing to cross into Sharm el-Sheikh, and from there took international flights abroad. According to reports, sea trips between Herzliya and Larnaca in Cyprus have become daily, and demand has increased significantly to the point that some families paid more than $15,000 just to leave. This makes us ask our questions. What are the implications of the Iranian strike on Soroka Hospital? What could be the missile used in this operation, and what does it mean? What does it mean that Iranian air defenses have started operating again over Tehran, and what is its impact on the battle? Thirdly, what is the Khandab nuclear facility? What is its function and status, and how did no nuclear radiation leak when it was hit? Fourthly, what's the story with Israelis who want to flee Israel, and why? How are they leaving, even though the Israeli government has suspended travel permits abroad? Has this become a temporary phenomenon, or is there evidence that it has become an ongoing issue? What routes are they taking to leave? Let's break down this scene piece by piece, analyzing the Beersheba attack. Initially, in the absence of information from both the Iranian and Israeli sides, we analyzed the attack that occurred in Beersheba using the 4 videos that documented the moment of the missile's impact and the subsequent massive explosion. This analysis relied on precise visual examination of all key frames, comparing angles, tracking the trajectories of projectiles and smoke, and the nature of the explosion. All of this was done to understand the type of missile used, the shape of its warhead, and the accuracy of the Israeli air defense system at that moment. What was clearly visible from the videos is that the missile directly impacted the facility and exploded just before or at the moment of impact. This resulted in a very large fireball and lateral blast pressure that caused the building to disintegrate from top to bottom. This effect indicates that the warhead carried by this missile was within the range of 400 to 600 kilograms of high explosives. This classification is similar to missiles like the Iranian Sejil II or Zulfiqar. Furthermore, the shape of the explosion and the missile's entry method indicate that the missile performed a maneuver in its final stage. It didn't enter at a sharp angle from above, but entered with a slight tilt and deviation. This means that Iran has the ability to guide missiles while they are still in the air, which makes intercepting them very difficult. This specific movement makes systems like Arrow or David's sling less effective in countering. This is indeed what appeared in the video. A clear interception attempt by a surface-to-air missile that launched quickly, but the explosion occurred a few seconds later. This means that the interception failed or happened too late. The system that appeared in the video is likely from the Arrow or David's sling category because the interception trajectory is almost vertical, and the interceptor missile's speed is very high. These characteristics are not compatible with the Iron Dome, which works on short-range missiles. However, even with the use of an advanced system, Israeli defenses could not stop this strike. This demonstrates a clear technological development in Iranian missiles, especially in terms of accuracy and the ability to evade interception systems. We are now facing a dangerous development. Iran is no longer focusing on launching a large number of missiles as it did before. Now the new trend is very clear. Fewer missiles, more accuracy, greater casualties, and more damage to facilities. This completely changes the nature of the battle. Over time, if Israel doesn't develop more effective interception systems, we will be facing a pattern of attacks reaching deep into Israeli cities, striking vital civilian targets like hospitals, universities, and power plants, all without Israel being able to stop them. As for the classification of the missile used, if we assume it was a Sejil II, it's considered to be approximately the third generation in the series of Iranian medium and long-range missiles. This missile uses solid fuel, has a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, possesses maneuvering capabilities in its final stage, and carries a conventional high-explosive warhead. This makes it ideal for striking relatively fortified residential or military targets. But is it Iran's most powerful weapon? No. Iran has newer and more dangerous models, such as the Khorramshahr 4, which carries a larger warhead and has a longer range. There are also other missiles equipped with satellite guidance capabilities or even a false thermal signature to deceive air defenses. So while the Sejil II is considered a backbone of Iran's ballistic deterrence, it's not the end of the line. What happened at Soroka Hospital is a symbolic scene of a qualitative shift in the nature of the confrontation between Israel's defenses, which have begun to show real vulnerabilities, and Iran's missiles, which are now striking with very high accuracy. The video shows the launch of 3 interceptor missiles from that battery at the same time as this missile. If you watched yesterday's episode, it will confirm that Israel will indeed face a problem of ammunition unavailability very soon because we launched 3 missiles to stop 1 Iranian missile, and yet it still hit its target. Also, with every strike of this type, the pressure on Israeli society, the government, and the home front will increase. These missiles are not just military tools, they are precisely directed strategic messages that explode with a much louder sound than just a conventional explosion. Keep in mind again, those who followed the June 17th episode will find that we said Iran likely regained control and recovered from the shock, and thus we would start to see a change in attack tactics. We also said at the time that we would begin to see a greater deployment of newer and more strategic missiles, and this is indeed what's happening. And now we are telling you that these strikes will intensify with fewer missiles, more accurate strikes, more Israeli casualties and injuries, and higher value targets. The exact same situation is occurring at the level of air defense in one of the clearest military transformations in this battle. At first, when Israel began its aerial attack, Iranian defenses were completely knocked out of service due to ground or aerial attacks on them after more than 40 air defense batteries were struck quickly and accurately in the first 24 hours alone. This paralyzed the Iranian defense network almost completely, especially over western Iran and the capital, Tehran. This paralysis wasn't metaphorical. We are talking about entire areas that were opened up to Israeli aircraft, which then operated freely over Iranian territory, reaching sensitive military and scientific sites without any effective aerial resistance. The number of batteries hit quickly increased to over 70, and most of the ground-based anti-aircraft systems were either out of service or effectively non-operational. Analyses at the time indicated that Iranian defenses had almost disappeared from the scene, and the airspace over Iran, especially the capital Tehran, was largely open. However, what caught attention and began to change expectations was what happened on the night of June 17, 18, which we explained in detail in yesterday's episode, when Iran announced that it had shot down an Israeli Hermes 900 drone over Isfahan province. This is one of the most advanced drones in the Israeli arsenal. This announcement wasn't theoretical. Iran released photos of the wreckage, and hours later, Israel itself admitted to shooting down the drone. This was the first real indicator that pockets of air defense had begun to operate deep inside Iran, especially around sensitive sites like the Isfahan nuclear facilities. But the decisive point occurred on June 19th, when the CNN correspondent in Tehran directly stated that Iranian air defenses were back in operation, and that he personally saw interceptor missiles launching from the ground to intercept aerial targets and heard explosions over the capital. Afterwards, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard officially announced that they had activated defenses before dawn, and it was clear from more than one source that defense systems had indeed been moved to the capital or reactivated after being out of service. This means that Iran was able to revive part of its defensive network in just 5 days, despite the intense and continuous strikes it is subjected to. So the issue here is not just logistical or technical, but also has a clear strategic dimension, the ability to recover while attacks persist, despite their strength. This recovery, even if partial, means that the Israeli offensive will be more difficult and air superiority is not guaranteed as it was in the early days. It also indicates that Iran has high flexibility in managing air warfare and is trying to distribute its systems in a variable way to reduce losses and maintain its ability to withstand. This also explains why the first downing of an Israeli aircraft occurred over Isfahan, not Tehran, because Isfahan had remaining protection, and the more important systems were distributed away from the initial attack centers. Why are we saying this? In the early days, Israel was operating with complete ease. Planes were striking and leaving without encountering any effective resistance. Now the situation has changed. Israel will be forced to adjust its tactics. For example, the planes that used to enter Iranian airspace in mass waves of different types will start reducing the number of sorties, and there will be greater reliance on F-35 stealth fighters. These planes have excellent stealth capabilities and are not easily detected by radar, and their bodies are covered with radar-absorbent materials. This is very important when surface-to-air missile systems are back in operation. However, F-35s are not ideal in all respects because their payload is very limited compared to F-15s or even F-16s. They carry only about 3 tons of ammunition, which is a small number when you're talking about a strategic airstrike on nuclear facilities or large military bases. Also, their operation is expensive and their maintenance takes time, and it's not easy to rely on them alone for continuous bombing campaigns. Israel will also find itself compelled to reduce the use of non-stealth fighters like the F-15 and F-16, as they will be exposed targets for ground radars, especially if they carry external fuel tanks. This is usually what happens so they can reach Tehran and return. The problem is that the flight path from Israel to Iran is very long, about 1,500 kilometers. So, you either refuel the plane in the air or carry external tanks, which increases the radar detection area. The natural response from Israel in this case is to operate at high altitudes and enter from distant routes, usually over Jordan or Iraq, then refuel over Azerbaijan or Syria. But all of this means that the arrival time increases, the cost becomes higher, and the combat payload decreases. So every raid now requires greater planning, and not every target can be easily struck as before. There's another important point. When Iranian air defenses operate, even partially, Israel is forced to review its target priorities. Instead of striking 6 sites in the same sortie, it might strike only 2. This makes operations longer and attacks less frequent. This increases the probability of any bombing wave failing before it achieves its strategic goal. Therefore, the return of Iranian defenses to operation not only directly affects air operations, but it also forces Israel to expend a large part of its resources just trying to open a safe corridor for the strike, not the strike itself. It could also lead the Israeli military command to favor more limited strikes or rely more on other tools like cyber warfare or long-range missile attacks. This brings us to the Israeli strike on the Arak heavy water facility, or the Kandab facility according to the new name. Here we must first understand the nature of the target itself. Kandab is a heavy water nuclear reactor, and this is not an ordinary facility. It's a unit historically linked to the production of plutonium suitable for making nuclear weapons. Iran built it in the 1980s with Chinese assistance and was always under international monitoring, especially from the Atomic Energy Agency. After the 2015 nuclear agreement, Iran agreed to change the reactor's design and fill it with cement so it couldn't produce military plutonium. But in 2019, Iran itself announced that it retained alternative tubes and could reassemble the reactor core or calandria at any time. This kept the reactor a constant target even if it wasn't operational at the time of the strike. That's why when Israel hit it, there was no radiation leak. This doesn't mean the reactor wasn't hit or that the strike was weak. On the contrary, reports indicate that Israel targeted the external structure and the point that seals the reactor chamber. But the main reason for the absence of radiation is that the reactor itself was not operating and there was no nuclear fuel inside it. This simply means you struck an empty nuclear reactor without enriched uranium and without ongoing heat or nuclear reaction. The intriguing part here is that the Israeli Air Force resorting to striking a non-operational nuclear reactor and not striking missile launch sites has only one explanation. Israel is unable to control Iran's missile launch capabilities, which should be a top priority at this moment. Striking a closed reactor, therefore, indicates a lack of intelligence information about missile launch locations, because at the same moment Israel was striking Kandab, Iran was escalating its attack, and hypersonic missiles were penetrating Israeli skies and striking its heart. Leaks are emerging about rationing Israeli interceptor missile consumption and the start of field rationing, prioritizing the protection of some areas and not others. This has created immense psychological pressure within Israeli cities themselves, where civilians no longer see an end to the war. On the contrary, they see ballistic missiles passing over their homes, with some wounded and casualties at a major hospital in the south. There are reports of weakness in the Army's deterrence capability, and everyone is asking themselves one question: is the country still safe? The answer to that question became clear in the behavior of thousands of Israelis who actually started looking for a way to leave Israel, either by sea or through the Taba crossing in Egypt or through Jordan. This is a point we will clearly break down in the next section, because we are not just facing a momentary panic, we might be witnessing the beginning of a new demographic shift based on a growing feeling of fragility and loss of trust in the state's ability to protect. This in itself is more dangerous than any missile. Why did we suddenly see a wave of mass exodus? How are they leaving, even though the government has closed airspace and prevented overseas travel? Let me take you back a bit. Figures show that in 2023, around 77,000 Jewish immigrants entered Israel, while about 42,000 people left permanently or for long periods. This means the net balance was positive. The state was still gaining residents. However, in 2024, the picture changed completely. The number of immigrants entering Israel in 2024 dropped to less than 46,000 new immigrants. This is the largest decline in decades, especially after the huge wave of immigration from Russia and Ukraine in 2022 and 2023 due to the war there. The main reason for this decline is that Jewish communities abroad now perceive the political and security situation in Israel as uncertain, in addition to the internal division that reached its peak during the judicial coup crisis in the same year. The number of people who left Israel increased significantly and recorded about 82,000 Israelis, almost double the number who entered. The net outcome for this year was negative for the first time in decades, with a population loss of about 36,000 people in the migration balance. This is a very large number for a country with a population of less than 10 million. More dangerously, this emigration wasn't due to temporary migration or because of the war. Instead, it was an organized departure of people working in advanced sectors, especially the technology sector, which represents about 18% of Israel's national output. There were waves of young people who traveled to Europe, Canada, and America and started new lives away from the security and political pressure within the occupation. There's also a big difference between the type of migration in the past and the migration happening now. In the past, those who traveled would return after 2 or 3 years or would leave for study. Now people are selling their properties, withdrawing their children from schools, and enrolling them in schools abroad. This means that these people don't intend to return. So, as we head into summer 2025, Israel was effectively in a situation where it had lost the demographic balance it was accustomed to. The mass migration that occurred with the first wave of missiles wasn't a moment of panic, but a natural continuation of a trend that began a full year earlier. This explains why the Israeli government was terrified of the idea of mass travel and decided to suspend exit permits, close airports, and build a legal framework around the population to prevent them from fleeing. But what's clear now is that the decision came too late, and the wave of escape was already underway and didn't need permission. Figures show that more than 25,000 applications for political asylum or long-term residency were submitted by Israelis abroad during the first 5 months of 2025, not to mention the thousands who left without leaving an official trace. What does "without leaving an official trace" mean? We are referring specifically to people who did not leave through airports or crossings where their data is recorded. Instead, we are talking about thousands of Israelis who left by sea or through secondary border crossings or even via a complex route that does not necessarily pass through a single point that registers departures. Therefore, the government itself is unable to accurately track them or say precisely who traveled when or where they went. The clearest example of this type of departure is the mass exodus towards Cyprus, which has become the alternative route after Israeli airspace was closed and commercial flights were suspended, and Ben Gurion Airport was converted into an operations base. What happened is that networks of private Jewish brokers and owners began coordinating direct sea trips from ports like Herzliya, Ashdod, and Haifa, heading towards Limassol port in Cyprus. This journey isn't easy, and it's not always entirely legal, but people were paying anything to get out. The first group to take to the sea were families with foreign passports or people with residency in a European country. These individuals paid between 1,500 and 2,500 euros per person to ride a medium-sized yacht. The trip takes approximately 13 to 18 hours depending on the type of vessel and sailing speed. But the advantage is that you don't go through passport control or central security. You leave from a private marina or a side coastal point and arrive on the other side as a private yacht or an emergency trip. The second group was on larger organized trips like what happened with the Birthright program, which took more than 1,500 young men and women on a single trip on a large cruise ship, accompanied by naval protection from the Israeli army. This cruise had special diplomatic arrangements because it carried dual nationalities, and coordination was made with Cyprus to accept it as a rescue trip. There was also the category of individuals who were fleeing privately. These were people with no foreign residency or coordination, but they paid huge sums ranging from $5,000 to $7,500 to get on a private boat. In some cases, families with children or elderly members paid even more. Reports from marine insurance companies in Cyprus indicate that some trips were delayed and that some boats broke down mid-journey due to poor equipment or overloading. Also, the legal situation in Cyprus itself was unclear. The Cypriot government received the trips but had not opened its airports for regular flights, leading to overcrowding in hotels. Over time, these people started moving to Turkey or Greece or even Western Europe by alternative means. What makes this scene so dangerous is not just the number of people who left, but also the type of people. We're talking about a middle and upper class with money, organizational capabilities, and legal or diplomatic alternatives that allow them to leave without feeling like they're officially emigrating. That is, the Israeli government isn't registering them as departures or emigrants, but they have effectively left and have no intention of returning under these circumstances. Now let's move to the second available route for those without yachts or foreign residency, by land through Egypt or Jordan. This was a more difficult route, but thousands tried to use it despite official Israeli warnings describing these crossings as unsafe. Let's start with the Egyptian side. The Taba border crossing leading to Sharm el-Sheikh became one of the most pressured crossings in the first week after the start of the Israeli strikes. Even though the Israeli government had suspended exit permits, some people had dual nationalities or entered on a tourist basis. Most of those who left from there were young people or small families with light bags, and the goal was to reach Sharm el-Sheikh airport and from there travel to Europe or the Gulf. The entire trip cost approximately $270 per person, divided into a bus ticket, 1 or 2 nights accommodation in a hotel, and a low-cost flight ticket from Sharm el-Sheikh airport to Europe. There are reports that private tourism companies started organizing group trips to leave from Tel Aviv to Taba, marketing them as a temporary experience, but in reality, it was a way for people to leave the country without being registered as immigrants. Some people reached Dubai and from there entered Europe or went to Turkey and then continued to Germany or the Netherlands. As for the Jordanian route, it was more complicated, as the Allenby Bridge crossing in particular does not easily allow Israelis to pass. So all movement was concentrated on the Sheikh Hussein crossing to the north or the Wadi Araba crossing to the south. The costs there are slightly lower than the Taba route, around $100 to $130 per person, but the transfer from the crossing to Amman Airport is not easy and requires prior coordination or knowledge within Jordan. Those who tried to take this route were often Israeli Arabs or those with family ties in Jordan. However, even some Jews used intermediaries to travel as tourists, and Israeli security agencies have indeed monitored dozens of cases who crossed as family visitors and did not return. Reports indicate that the number of travel requests to Jordan tripled in the first 10 days of the escalation. But we must also say that these two routes are not suitable for everyone. There are political and security risks in leaving through these crossings, especially if a wider escalation occurs. Despite this, people were not waiting for permission. Every day a small wave was moving, and over time we began to notice that the congestion was not only in the ports but also at the land crossings, travel agencies, and even in WhatsApp groups distributing information about the easiest way to leave. So the picture before us now is that the exodus has become class divided, and its paths are parallel. Those with money take the sea to Cyprus, and those with nationality go to Dubai or Athens. Those who can only find Taba or Wadi Araba take the difficult route. In all cases, there's a clear pattern. People are leaving not easily but with determination, and they are creating new ways every day out of the state's sight and outside official statistics. This is effectively putting the government in a state of confusion, unable to know how many it has lost, or who, or when, or from where. In conclusion, with the development of the Iranian attack and its ability to deliver precise strikes, like the targeting of Soroka Hospital, and with Iran partially regaining its air defense capabilities over Tehran, it's clear that the battle is no longer one-sided. Israel is gradually losing its air superiority at the same time that thousands of Israelis are trying to flee by sea and land, as if they see what's coming not as a few days of escalation but a new, prolonged phase of war. People have begun to grasp that this isn't a momentary reaction. It's an Iranian strategy moving steadily toward a long war of attrition, aiming to draw Israel into an open drain. At that point, America won't remain on the sidelines and will be forced to intervene with all its might and strike Iran to try and stop the war before it spirals out of control. Unfortunately, according to all our analyses, this will not stop the war. It will start a larger, longer, and more destructive war. The outcome is something no one can definitively predict. Iran could indeed become a graveyard for America and Israel, just as Afghanistan was a graveyard for the Soviet Union. Or Iran itself could turn into the remnants of a state and a part of history. But what we are certain of is that we have entered an era of open wars, and the final chapter has yet to be written. But what's certain is that we will witness it live with our own eyes on WWIII Secrets.